I, for one, needed to be challenged today. I'm glad that Roger brought the Sunday school lesson and that the phone worked and everything came together. I appreciate the reminder about Booth and Brazee. Sometimes we got to remember what our founding fathers went through and the circumstances and choices that they made. Without their choices, the face of Christianity would be much different than what it is today. And the Church of the Nazarene with Brazee, the Church of the Nazarene probably wouldn't even exist if he would not have taken the decisions that he did. And so I think we need to be reminded of that. We're going to have John chapter 20, verse 15. We're going to begin to get our minds set ready for the Holy Week time, Palm Sunday and Resurrection Sunday and all that goes along with that. And so we're kind of getting into that mindset now. And we're going to look at two parts, if time will permit. The first part is at the grave after the resurrection. And then the second part is looking at the people that are involved in the entire story in the message today. So John chapter 20, verse 15.
Is that St. John?
St. John. St. John chapter 20, verse 15. Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Now this conversation is taking place with Mary Magdalene outside of the tomb. Jesus is already risen, and this storyline lays out this way. Mary Magdalene goes to the graveside while it's still dark outside. So she's one of the first ones there to see what has happened. When the stone is rolled away, what would you think if you had gone to a person that you had watched absolutely brutalized and murdered and slaughtered, and then you go to the tomb and the stone that was meant to seal him in is rolled away? It would shake you up, wouldn't it? It would shake me up. Mary was so shaken up that she takes off and goes back and tells John and Peter, hey, something's going on. They've removed Jesus, and I don't know where they've put him. And that leads into these three types of people that fit into this story. John is the first one. He's the same disciple that is writing this account that took place. So he knew the story firsthand because he was there. So he's writing this account. John and Peter take off running. They're running neck and neck with each other. We know that Mary is apparently following back behind them because she ends up back at the tomb. So she wasn't running as fast. I guess maybe it isn't proper for a lady to run in that day and time. Today, ladies can outrun me. I used to tease the ladies on Mother's Day, I pick on you because I can outrun you. I can't outrun them anymore, so I stopped picking on them because they're faster than I am. But back in that day and time, Mary would have probably not ran. She would have been walking along behind. And John and Peter are running together, but John turns out to be just a little bit faster than Peter. And John gets to the tomb before Peter gets to the tomb, but John didn't go on in. John stopped short and just bent down and looked into the tomb so he could see. Maybe he didn't have the courage. Maybe he was thinking, do I really want to run into a tomb? I got friends who walk through cemeteries for fun. I kind of think, when we go to Arizona, we go to the Boot Hill Cemetery sometimes out there and walk around in that. And it's like, why would somebody want to walk around in a cemetery? You're kind of strange in that. So John gets there and he stops short. There's a lot of people like that in church today. They get out ahead of everybody because they don't want to wait. They get tired of sitting and waiting for God to do something, and so they run out ahead. But when they get there, they don't have the courage to go on in. They stop short, and they don't get the full blessing because they're not willing to get into the middle of the storyline, of the circumstance that is going on. Peter is not quite as fast. But Peter is very well known. That's why I like Peter so much. Peter is very well known for acting before he thinks. If you are in that category, you know why I say I like Peter so much. He doesn't think about what he's doing. He just gets to the tomb where John is standing on the outside looking in, and he just runs right on into the tomb. And you have people like that will get out ahead of everything that you are doing. That you say something and they think they understand it, and so they jump on that and go with it, not really knowing what is really going on. And that's Peter. He just runs on by and runs into the tomb. Well, John, now that Peter has run in, John walks in too with him. Sometimes when somebody has courage, others will follow them. It takes a whole lot of courage to be the one that goes first. But a lot of times the other person will follow that one that has courage. They get into the tomb and they see the clothes and they experience just a piece of the miracle. But then they go home. I have often thought, and I don't understand this dynamic of us as Christians. We get in our mindset that church has to be over in a set amount of time, and if it's not, we get frustrated and we want to go home. And I think, well, what if God chose to move 15 minutes after our time limit? So we reach, our time is different here. Most churches, it has been noon because of the time is different in the church. In our time, it's closer to 11 when we get out. But if you go past that period of time, then people begin to get fidgety, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to sit there. He's going too long. He needs to stop. I've been in some churches that I've teased them. I did that more when I was an evangelist, not a pastor. You can get by with things when you're an evangelist that you can't get by with as a pastor. I used to say, I think all of you people have taken a water pill before you came to service today, because I've never seen so many people in an hour's period of time have to go to the bathroom. It's like, my word, man, but that mindset of we think that everything has to happen according to us. And if it doesn't, then we'll just go home. Mary wasn't as fast as the two disciples, but we find her back at the tomb. It doesn't even talk about her running. It just says that she ends up back at the tomb.
Last, did you say?
What's that?
Did you say last? She ended up last?
She ended up last, even though she was there first before anyone else. But when the race happens, she's the last one to get there. And she's standing outside the tomb, and she bends down to look in to see what's going on. And she sees two angels. I kind of wondered, were those two angels there when John and Peter were in the tomb? Or did they just show up when Mary looked in there? Could they have been there and John and Peter were so wrapped up in looking at the clothes and all of those things that they didn't notice them? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The scripture doesn't tell us. It's just speculation in my mind that makes me think of her bowing down and looking, and the two angels appeared to not be there when John and Peter were there, but there they are. And they ask her, "Why are you crying?" And before she says to them, "They've removed my Lord and I want to find him." Now that's paraphrase, but I want to find where he is so that I can take him and take care of his body. But the angels don't even get the opportunity to answer her. The Creator is going to answer for himself. Now that leads to this interesting thing that takes place. It fascinates me. The same thing happens on the road to Emmaus with the two followers that Jesus appears and begins to talk to them. They don't recognize Jesus. This is the one that they've been following for years and listening to. Jesus says to Mary, "What are you weeping for? What are you seeking for?" And Mary goes through the whole speech because she thinks he's the gardener. And I think, you're looking for Jesus and Jesus is talking to you and you think Jesus is the gardener. And the picture that paints for me is when we get so wrapped up in our circumstances and our grief and our weeping and our sorrow and our pain and our hurt, Jesus speaks to us and we don't even recognize who he is. After Mary Magdalene gives the speech to Jesus, Jesus doesn't respond to her whole speech that she gives. He just says to her, "Mary." I can imagine the chills going up and down Mary Magdalene's spine as she recognizes, I've heard that voice calling my name before. I know who that is. And then the real tears come. The realization, she's the first one. And this was not a woman that had a good reputation, that was known for good things. The Bible tells us she was first of all a prostitute. She was second of all filled with 7 demons inside of her when Jesus came into her life. Jesus seems to like to call people like that. He seems to like to call people that have lots of flaws. I've got an opinion of why. You may have a different opinion. That's okay with me if you have a different opinion. I think the reason that he does that is because we that are called out of the life of sin and circumstances where we had nothing to offer know that we can never take credit for what God has done with our lives. It is all to his glory. One of my favorite teachers is Dr. John Oswalt. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was the last time that I knew, he was the president of Wesley Biblical Seminary in Mississippi. But I don't know where he's at now. He does some speaking for the Francis Asbury Society. If you want to know about the book of Isaiah, Dr. Oswalt is the one that you would ask. He is the preeminent teacher on the book of Isaiah. I would listen to him, and somehow he had this knack about him that when he would talk and teach, it just connected to me. It was just like I could see it happening as he was teaching it. He was just the teacher for me. And I would go up to him and I'd say, "Dr. Oswalt, I hope that you don't mind, but I'm going to plagiarize you because I thought that I understood this and I didn't understand it at all. I found out that I did." And this was always his response. "No credit goes to me. If you want to plagiarize, the glory goes to God. He's the one that gave it to me." So no matter how smart we become or no matter how much we think that we know, we recognize in the response, this is about a God that takes a person that doesn't have any right or any claim to anything, and God changes them and makes them into a vessel that He can use. No matter what you might have been. And I always beat on that drum because I've ministered to lots of people through the years that were convinced that they had done things so badly that God could never forgive them for what they had done. And the answer to that is in great big giant letters, as big as I can make it, no. God will forgive you and use you if you will just allow Him to. But oftentimes it's in our attitudes. Anybody in here, maybe I don't want to ask you to raise your hand. I just raised my hand. Anybody in here have a problem with their attitudes sometimes? In the midst of my attitudes, I can still write it and preach it. I can make myself sound like I'm up on top of the mountaintop when on the inside my whole thing is coming undone. Attitudes get us in so much trouble. And there's different attitudes that are shown in this story. And I want to share with you those attitudes. The first one is the palm waver. The first one is the palm waver. We'll talk about the palm waver a little bit on Palm Sunday coming up in just a couple of weeks. But the palm waver will run along behind you and beside you, waving the palms and telling you how cool you are. You're just the best thing since sliced bread. They'll be at all of the celebration services and events, and anytime there is a crowd, they will be in the middle of that crowd. We call them often in the ministry something that a lot of you might have heard of. They are C&E Christians. You know what that is? Christmas and Easter. They're Christians on Christmas and Easter, and the rest of the time they don't have time to be bothered. They'll probably sing the loudest and pray the loudest, but here's the catch of the palm wavers. As long as you are their ideal of what they think you should be, as long as you do and say everything the way that they want you to, they will follow along with you. You can ride into town on the donkey, and they'll be behind you waving their banners. But as soon as you dare to stand up to them and challenge them and their attitudes and their practices, they will crucify you. I was in a church. They did pastor appreciation in October. And I got so upset. Maybe I've told this story before. I use it quite often. I got so upset at the pastor appreciation service, I walked out. This is what they were doing. The piano player was sitting at the piano playing, and they began to chant. Pastormike. Pastor Mike. And they hollered it out. I sat on the seat and I thought, what in the world are you doing? What are you doing? We don't chant a pastor's name in our church. The only name that we lift up and exalt is the only name given under heaven whereby you must be saved, and that name is Jesus Christ. A few weeks later, they were all in a special meeting behind my back to vote me out. See, that's what the palm wavers will do. The palm wavers were all behind Jesus on Palm Sunday, but by Good Friday they were shouting, "Crucify him." So that's the problem with that attitude. The second group of people is the disciples. They will walk along beside you. They feel good about being a part of your group and being on the inner circle. They know that when you build your kingdom on earth, that's what they're waiting for, is when you build your kingdom on earth, that they already have their position secured. So they're not worried about going deeper or following you further. That's why when it came down to the garden where Jesus was arrested, all of the disciples scattered from him. They walked along beside him as long as they thought the position was secured. But as soon as something goes wrong, they all desert. The third type of person are constantly nipping at the heels of the disciples, trying to get them to quiet down and not cause a distraction and not cause a disruption. And the disciples just kind of just go along about their business. And their concern is Jesus, who's going to be the greatest. You remember that story. Jesus had just told them, "I'm going to go and be crucified." And the response of the disciples was, "Who will be the greatest in your kingdom?" Totally missing the point. Yes, they were waving the palms too, but they didn't know why Jesus was on the donkey or why he was riding into town. They were just caught up in what everybody else was doing. Be careful if you are a disciple that just follows everybody else. I watch some of these mega churches. I don't anymore. I used to. I watch some of these mega churches and the camera will pan out into the crowd as they're doing their so-called worship. And you'll watch these people that look all around them. Everybody else has their hands up. So up goes their hands. And they're praising and worshiping God. No, they're not. They don't have any idea why they're raising their hands. They're just doing it because everybody else is doing it. You used to see that a lot of times in youth services. If you could get one of the leaders of the youth group to come up to the altar and pray, all of the rest of the youth group would come up because they were following what that leader did and not because they understood what was happening. So sometimes the disciples fall into that measure. Then you have the Pharisees. The Pharisees will always be trying to quiet the people and to go against you no matter what it is that you do. If you get down on your knees every Sunday and kiss their hand, they still will find fault with you. If you heal people around you, they will accuse you of not washing your hands before you did it. What were they even upset about Jesus about? What were they even mad at him about? He never showed any interest in an earthly kingdom. He never came in and tried to throw them away from the temple so that he could take charge. He threw them out of the temple because they was using the temple for the wrong reason. But Jesus never showed any desire for earthly power. Why were the Pharisees so angry at him? Because he called them out where they were. You are blind teachers leading the blind. I've often said that. You want to see a pastor be asked to leave immediately? Let him get up and tell his congregation that they're a bunch of vipers and hypocrites. That will get him sent out from the church immediately. Jesus called them out where they were, and they didn't like the exposure because darkness does not like light. Because light, any little bit of light will clear the darkness out immediately. I got frustrated when I was in Oskaloosa. To all my friends in Oskaloosa, I loved all that you did for me. But I got frustrated in Oskaloosa because right outside of my window were big lights, security lights that shine. And those lights just took my darkness away. I can only sleep if it's dark. And except for when I fall asleep working on a computer. That's another message. Let's just forget that one. Okay? And talk about that another time. So no matter what you do, because the Pharisees find their greatest pleasure in telling you, I told you that would fail. I told you that wouldn't work. I told you you couldn't do that. The Pharisees find their greatest pleasure in doing that. The problem is that most palm wavers follow along with what the Pharisees say. The palm wavers are just followers. They're just doing. So when the Pharisees begin to stir things up and they say, crucify him, the palm wavers are saying, crucify him, crucify him. Not because they knew why he needed to be crucified, but because the palm wavers follow the Pharisees. And so you've got those people in denominations and in churches that everybody looks to. And no matter what you try to do, it will always be undermined. Fortunately, we don't have enough people at Boone Nazarene to worry about that in that setting, so that doesn't matter. I've seen too many times how quickly those palm wavers will begin to call out, crucify him. Then we have the ideal. We have the ideal, which is the man sitting on the donkey. Not exalted. If you want to exalt a ruler and a king, you don't put him on a donkey. You put him on a great big white stallion. That's how Jesus is coming back, by the way. When he comes back, he won't be riding on a donkey. He'll be riding on a great white stallion. Just be careful that you don't get deceived, because the Antichrist will come first riding on a great white stallion. So be careful that you know who it is that you are following. Jesus rode on that donkey. He didn't try to exalt himself. The Jewish people would have made him king right there in that moment. That's what they wanted. They wanted Jesus to be king in that moment. Jesus didn't look out for his best interest. He was too busy weeping over the city of Jerusalem, looking out over the horizon and saying, how often would I have gathered you under my wings? But you wouldn't. You didn't want to be where I wanted you to be, and now your house is desolate. But that didn't stop Jesus from loving them and praying for them and weeping over them. Do you ever get angry at somebody you're praying for and want to just give up? Just quit praying. I admit it. You don't have to admit it. I admit it. I've watched over the last few weeks, and I hope they're watching this. I've watched over the last few weeks as first my niece gave her heart to Jesus Christ. Then my great niece, who was in jail waiting to go before the judge, this past week gave her heart to Jesus Christ. You don't ever give up. Jesus doesn't ever give up on extending his hand to us and saying, I will accept you if you will accept me. If you will do what I say, if you will abide by my commandments, if you will follow what I tell you to do, I will in no wise cast you out. That's who we want to be. We need to have the mind of Christ, and the mind of Christ is just not even talked about in church anymore. It isn't even an issue to consider. But the man riding on the donkey knew. He was connected to the Father, his Father. He knew what the real value was, and it wasn't the ones waving their palms and shouting Hosanna at him. It wasn't even at the disciples that were following along beside. It certainly was not at the Pharisees. It was doing the will of his Father. For in just a couple of days, he will walk into the garden, sweat drops of blood, as he cries out to his Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but thy will be done. There's all different kinds of people with all different kinds of attitudes. Some bring about good things in our lives, some bring about bad things in our lives. My question for you, and I hope that you'll be brutally honest with yourself. My question for you, where do you fit in that spectrum? Where do you fit in those types of people? Father, would you have your way in us? Would you have your way in our church? Sometimes just being honest with you, sometimes I feel like that I fit into multiple parts of that categories that we talked about, because some days I feel like I'm following you the way that I should, and other days I feel no better than a palm waver. Lord, help us to get it. Help us to get it so that we realize we don't want to have the mind of Christ just on Sunday morning. We want to have the mind of Christ in everything that we do, in all that we are, in every action that we take. Help us to do that. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you. Thank you for listening. You're dismissed.